Hello, welcome to this review for The Shadow of the Torturer by Gene Wolfe. Here resplendent in this beautiful Timescape edition with its cover by Don Mates. It's an absolutely spectacularly beautiful cover, and it wasn't until I was getting ready for this review that I realized that it's a first edition. Thank you Ron for Alspace. Mr. and Mrs. Elspace, I'm afraid it's a little bit more battered than when you sent it to me. I have read this everywhere. I've carried it around with me in my bag, and it's consequently slightly battered, but very well loved because I adored this book. So Gene Wolfe was an American author who died in 2019, born in 1931. He was a grand master of the science fiction and fantasy writers of America, and he published his first novel in 1970. So when Shadow of the Torturer came out in 1980, or was accepted at least in 1980, he'd been writing for 10 years, and it really shows. I think the prose is beautiful. This is science fiction literature. This is as beautiful as many of my favorite literary authors, and far more beautiful than some of them. Spectacular book, in my opinion. It also won a lot of awards. So 1981 could almost be described as when The Shadow of the Torturer swung through the awards and collected them like someone picking strawberries. It got the Best Science Fiction Award in 1981, the Best World Fantasy in 1981, got second for the 81 Locus and the second for the Campbell Awards, also the same. It was nominated for Balrog, Nebula and Locus. Hugo, it was nominated all over the place, and it's, in my estimation, still a beautiful science fiction fantasy, right at that cross line where these days people don't write on that liminal space, if you will, between fantasy and science fiction. They don't walk on the beach and dabble their toes in one and the other. They go all out fantasy or all out science fiction. Well, this is both. It reads like epic fantasy. The writing is as beautiful as the most other beautiful fantasy that you can read. But there is science fiction in there, and that science fiction gives a richness to the world building which brings it into a whole new space. This world building would, for me, always be incredibly rich and incredibly beautiful. But the science fiction hints make it more so. So you're probably not hearing about The Shadow of the Torturer for the first time from me. It's an incredibly well-known book. And it's not always a beloved book. There are a lot of people who find the writing dry. I don't. I think it's lush. I think this is the Sasha Tort of writing. Possibly the raspberry velvet dessert of writing. It is gorgeous, lush, rich, piquant. It is everything that I want from a truly beautiful book. But lots of people do find it dry and unreadable. Now, whilst I was glancing through other people's reviews, I came across one by another author that I find quite amazing, Mark Lawrence, and he makes a very good point about it. He makes a point about the torturer scene. So The Shadow of the Torturer revolves around the life of Severian. Severian is our main character. He has been in the Guild of the Torturers his whole life, and when this book really starts, he's standing at the gate to the necropolis below his tower, dripping and cold and shivering from the swim in the river that he went on with his three friends. And we're about to have this truly exciting adventure for a boy in a graveyard with grave robbers and soldiers and everything. It's great. But not too far past that, we come across our first torture scene. And I have to say, it shook me. It is told in a dry, matter-of-fact fashion, but it describes a complete boot, which is basically degloving all the skin off a leg from the knee down. Now, because this is so early in the book and it is quite a horrific event, though it's not told in in a horrific manner. It isn't meant to be gratuitously violent, but because of what it is, anyone with an imagination is going to end up shaking and reaching for a drink. I reached for a cup of tea after it, and I was shook. I can see a lot of people who have read a lot of fantasy, who aren't yet bonding with the writing style, which I think is well worth bonding with, reading about this torture event and saying, nah, I'm done, I'm stopping here. I can see that happening. I think it's probably happened to many people. I kept going, and I was initially a little bit mystified by the fact that in this whole book there's only really 2 examples of torture. So if you're holding back from Gene Wolfe on the basis of you're not sure how much torture you can stomach, there's only really 2, and neither of them are particularly bloody or gratuitous, but they are horrific in the way that they are integrated into the mentality of our main character, into the mentality of the world that he occupies. So there's an element of horror from that more than from the actual gory events, which aren't terribly gory. So Severian, having managed to get back into his tower with his friends, we see his apprenticeship progressing on to journeyman stage. And so essentially we learn this world from the point of view of someone who's grown in it, up in it, is not doubting it, just knows the way it is. And the way it is this incredible, huge, decadent city called Nessus. Now, speaking of, have I said that right? I think it's Nessus. Nessus. Now, having said that, I'm going to go back to the writing style which Gene Wolfe gifts us. It is lush. I don't understand how people think it's dry. I guess they're used to more modern, I don't know, writing, but this is full of information. You've got the world building, which uses words and phrases you know, others you need to look up, ones you will never be able to look up because they are derivative. And right at the back of this volume, we get a note on the translation, which is very valuable to understanding the book if you've made it so far. But you have to just coast through the writing because there is so much of it, and all of it is so rich. And Nessus is a perfect example. So Nessus is the name of the town, I believe. It's not a town, city. This is this vast city that lasts for days worth of walking, surrounded by walls made of metal, in which there is an actual citadel with other walls also made of metal, in which there are towers. Towers of the torturer, towers of the witches, the towers of all these different guilds. And the names for the guilds are creative. The guild that I would think of as librarian is actually called curators. And Severian, once he becomes a journeyman, is sent on a trip. It ends up as a mission to hand a note to the master of the curators. And in methods like that, Wolfe shows us this incredible citadel that he has built for us. Nessus is the name of the city. It's also the name of the river that goes through it. Now, Nessus kept ringing a faint bell in the back of my brain, and eventually I looked it up. Nessus is the name of a centaur from Greek mythology. And I would say that that is far from coincidental, because the Greek mythology story, the centaur is poisoned by, I think it's Hercules, I can't remember exactly who, and he gifts some of his poisoned blood to the man's wife as a, can't remember the excuse, but through that he actually poisons his poisoner, so he gets his revenge after death. And we first hear the name and we just take it on board because it's a fantasy world, right? A lot of it's going to be fantastical. Towards the end of the book, a chance encounter between Severian and a man tells the story of the creation of the city, and that made me look up Nessus. So in Greek mythology, Nessus has come to be synonymous for poisoning and betrayal, and the story describes a past in which the river was not yet poisoned. Right at the end of this book, we start to get a sense of the true richness of the city and the world within the context of the trilogy that we know is to come. And if I'm correct, Wolfe had actually blocked out the whole trilogy of events when he submitted this first book. So it didn't just meander, he had a plan. Now, yes, so we've got a whole story that is fantastic and fantastical and marvelous to read, and it's about this young man, Severian, being brought up in the Guild of Torturers. And like any apprentice, he does small things. He runs errands, he cleans things, and we have these tiny insulated stories that build up a lifetime, that build up your lifetime, my lifetime of childhood, the small stories we would tell our intimates and friends about that to create the citadel of our memory. And Wolfe uses that style of narration to build this citadel of the world of Severian. And that's the first third. And it's marvelous. I enjoyed every second of it. I carried it around with me, so if I had 10 minutes in between things I was doing, I could read a little bit more. I took it to the beach. I read it on the beach. Consequently, it got a bit battered. I'll be more careful with the next one, I hope. And at times I read late into the night, so I was falling asleep before I put it down, and I think I missed bits, so I'm going to have to reread it in a couple of years. That first third was absolutely marvelous, and then it does a weird twisty turny thing. So I don't think this is exactly a spoiler, because you'll probably find it on the back of the book, which I haven't actually bothered to read, or elsewhere on the internet, and you're clearly on the internet. Severian makes a mistake in bonding with a woman who is in one of the cells, a client as they call them. And in that you can see, in this scene, you can see how much of an influence Gene Wolfe has been on many other authors. So he bonds with her. She is an honoured guest until the order comes through from the ruler, the autotarch, who will order her tortured. But that isn't imminent. In the meantime, she's given every courtesy of a prisoner. So Severian goes to bring her these 3 books, and she asks that he continue to bring her meals and chat with her because she has no one to talk to. So he does. And through these books, and through this woman who came from the ruler's court, he learns more about the world, and so do we. He becomes attached to her. And having made his journeyman stage, the very first, as we can kind of predict coming, the very first torturing event that he attends is hers. As a consequence of which, he slips in a knife to her that will enable her to end her own life so that she won't have to undergo any more torture. At this point, by the way, she's been in that cell for about, I think, 2 or 3 years. There's been at least 2 winters in there. Having done so, the master isn't quite sure what to do with Severian. Apparently his brothers are split on whether he should be tortured and killed himself, or whether he should be thrown out of the guild. He ends up somewhere in the middle. He is thrown out of the guild. He is sent to this far town, a town which needs a, what is the word they use for it? I have forgotten. Carnifex. They need a carnifex, basically an executioner. And so Severian, with his experience as a torturer, is being sent there. At this point, the book takes its wibbly-wobbly turn. Up until then, it's felt remarkably focused, and the narration has been incredibly clear, but now it starts to meander. Severian leaves the tower to commence a long journey, and I was a bit sad about that. I really liked the tower. But a journey should be a point where a plot in a fantasy epic, and this reads like a fantasy epic, even though it's fantasy science fiction, the journey should be where the story develops momentum. Here it's where I don't think you can argue with the fact that this is where the book loses momentum. Severian is walking and walking. He's walking for such a long time that one feels he must be halfway to this tiny village that he's going to, only it turns out he has not yet left the city. This might very well illustrate the magnitude of the city of Nessus and what we're talking about here. But throughout that, he's gone through different areas. It's like they're not even suburbs. They're like almost different cultures. And he has these different small adventures, some of which don't feel like they move the plot forward, though ultimately I think they do, and many of which just seem to interrupt the flow of the story to me. They're more like vignettes or small short stories. I guess in this day and age this would be book 1, the next one would be book 2, and half of these experiences of Severian would be book 0.5 or those other weird things that they do. Each one of these stories is good. It's beautifully written, the characters are wonderful, but it doesn't feel like it moves the story forward, and it does feel like the story stagnates significantly until just before the ending, when it picks up its momentum and is once again going in a clear direction. So this swirly black hole of experiences in the middle may take some reading through. A couple of times I was just a bit mystified and lost track. I never stopped reading this book. There was never any chance I would stop reading this book. But I'd pick it each time with a bit more mystification than eager anticipation, as was usually the case. Well worth reading through. If you don't love that part of the book, and a few people have really, really not loved that part of the book, I would say still read it, because all those stories, read it with it in your mind that you're reading individual stories, and you will probably enjoy them. There is one ongoing long story that introduces us to a whole heap of new things within the capital and brings another character on board, which I'm not going to mention because that is spoilery. But all these weird side tracks, side quests, odd characters do end up as one melded story. I promise. I'm certain. Now, one of the things about this traveling that is possibly what Wolfe was getting to is that Severian is traveling and torturers don't travel, and yet he's instantly recognized all the way along the road. I think that even more so than the early stories about the guild, serves to tell us how integral a part the torturers play to this world. There's another couple of things that are definitely going to get picked up in the next book. For example, that earliest story of Severian's when he's outside the gate, waiting to get into the necropolis to go home after an illicit swim in the river. That is linked to a rebel against the Autotruck. Rule of the world, whatever. And that is a very thin underline to much of this story, and will clearly be developed later. Now, a note on the translation is in the appendix. This isn't going to be spoilery, but it is a great touch on the part of Wolfe. If you've made it to the end, you probably have loved it and you want to know more. And he says, in rendering this book, originally composed in a tongue that has not yet achieved existence. So this book is basically Severian, sometime in the future of this book, writing down his experiences. There are teasers and tasters of what he is by the time he's writing down these experiences that are very interesting. And in this appendix, Gene Wolfe makes it clear that the time and space in which this occurs is odd. It isn't necessarily Earth with a capital E, it's described as Earth with a capital U. There's science fiction, there's been future traveling to the stars, there's metal, there are species that don't exist. Are they as a result of gene meddling, or have they been creatures brought back into existence? You can't always tell. And there's words that don't always help you. So, and through all that, all these things that might under other circumstances mystify and annoy me, you've got this spectacular, this gorgeous, this absolutely lush writing that makes Gene Wolfe completely worth reading in my estimation. The other thing that he does better than some of the books I've read recently is characters. He can, in 2 sentences, create a character that is so memorable that you will remember it long past this book. Whereas other books that shall remain nameless will take 3 or 4 pages to write a character that is utterly forgettable and might as well not be there. So in every respect, I'm going to say Gene Wolfe, Hall of Fame, wonderful book. My only serious question is, do I go straight onto Claw of the Conciliator, or do I take a sorbet first? Gulping down books and series doesn't always work. Maybe. But can I resist? It's sitting right there. I can see it. Anyway, thank you for watching. Read good books. By all means, if you're looking for a good book and you've got a Gene Wolfe available, read that, because in my estimation, in my opinion, you probably can't do better in terms of good books than Gene Wolfe. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.